have you noticed that politicians struggle to enact the things they run on? That regardless of who wins elections, lawmakers cannot pass whatever legislation they like. They find themselves bound by what is popular, or at least their sense of it. They can only act within a narrow set of ideas, and that range is called the Overton window. And on the Overton window, we look at issues around the country and talk to the people who change what is politically possible. Can the president declare an emergency and declare whatever tariff policy he wants? Well, Jeffrey Schwab doesn't think so, and he is suing the federal government to stop them. Jeffrey is the senior counsel at the Liberty Justice Center. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't you think that the president has the authority to set tariffs?
Well, the Constitution gives Congress the power to set tariffs. Congress is allowed to delegate some of that power, but it can't just entirely delegate all of the power without any kind of checks or limitations.
Where could readers learn more about the depth of that argument?
Well, we filed a lawsuit called VOS Selections versus Trump. Our firm, the Liberty Justice Center, is representing 5 individual small businesses free of charge, as we do all of our clients. You can find more information about Liberty Justice Center and about our lawsuit on our website, libertyjusticecenter.org. There's a case page about the case. I think it's probably easily accessed from the homepage.
Thanks. I know, because a lot of these things get complicated. There's back and forth. There's discussion about how much authority has been delegated to the president. But you had a brilliant and consistent and easy argument to make. It's Congress's authority, not the president's. So you're suing the federal government. How's that going?
Well, we just had an oral argument in the Court of International Trade. That's a federal Article III court in New York City, and it hears...
what's Article III court? What's that?
Article III court is just like a normal federal court that has judges appointed by the president. In this case, the Court of International Appeals has exclusive jurisdiction over trade matters. That's why this case is before the Court of International Trade. But otherwise, for the most part, it operates just like a regular federal district court. It is basically the trial court for these matters. Often it hears just sort of small, minor matters about individual companies or businesses, trade disputes, maybe something about, well, should this product be classified in this category, this other category, and the difference is a 2% tariff versus a 3% tariff or something like that. And so it hears cases often like that. But this case obviously is a little bit more important and broad, because it affects every product. Just about every product, but every good that's imported to the United States from just about every country.
Tell me about your clients.
So we have 5 small business clients. They are in all different industries, and they collectively import from, I think, 38 different countries. So our lead client, VOS Selections, is an importer of wine and spirits. And so they import they negotiate with suppliers, so basically farmers who grow and produce wine. And obviously the tariffs significantly affect them, because it increases the amount of money that they've got to pay. And of course, wine is the kind of product that if the price goes up quite a bit, then people will buy less of it, or will just stop buying wine. And the other significant thing about VOS Selections is that wine isn't the type of thing that you can just replace. Like, you can't a Bordeaux wine or
Argentinian wine in the United States.
In the United States.
Yeah.
So it's not really taking away American jobs or manufacturing. I'll tell you a little bit about our other clients if you want. We have a small business, Micro Kits. They make these fun little kits that you can make these little electronic devices that will make music, make sound. It's operated by one guy. He's got a part-time employee. He's got to import these electronic parts. A lot of them aren't made in the United States, so he's got to import them. And of course, the important thing to know about electronics is that if you don't have a part, then the device will not work. You have to have every single part. And if he were to, use stuff manufactured here that is manufactured here, it would be much more expensive, and that would make his product less viable. The other option, he manufactures the product himself in the United States. So the other alternative would be to manufacture outside of the United States to avoid the tariffs on every single one of these components. That would still make the product more expensive, and it would also make his product worse, he thinks, because he would have less control over the quality of it.
As in, to dig it on that example, he's a manufacturer, uses parts that are made abroad, manufactures them in the United States, but sells them in the United States and around the world. And so,
right.
And so this is so the tariffs would push him out of the or could push him out of the country.
Yeah, and another client that has a similar point is Genova Pipe. They make what's called ABS pipe. That's similar to PVC pipe, but it's the kind of thing that you probably have in your house that it probably takes away your wastewater, something like that. So it's an important product, and it's manufactured in the United States. They have, I think, 6 facilities. But the chemical resin that they need to manufacture is made in South Korea. So they need to import that product, that chemical resin, to make their products here. And they do have a facility in Washington State, and many of the products that they make in Washington State they export to Canada. But now they can no longer be competitive with their competitors in Canada, because their competitors don't have to pay the tariff to import the chemical resin. So they can they have a much better margin and maybe can sell the product cheaper than our client can. And so that actually will hurt American exports. And that is, of course, something that the Trump administration doesn't want to do. The point of the tariffs is the opposite, but in this case, it's possibly hurting the exports.
So this is an incredibly interesting slate of clients that you've got, because I think it cuts to the heart of some of the tariff arguments. The basic case that has been made for tariffs is that if we make foreign goods more expensive, we're going to drive manufacturing to the United States to replace these now more expensive foreign suppliers. And you've got someone who, yes, there are alternatives to wine, but they're not perfect alternatives. You can't grow Australian wine in the United States, or French wine, or these other things that have distinctive characteristics, and that's part of the goal of the plate, or of part of the enjoyment of enjoying wine. But you have all these other manufacturers who are like, look, we've got a good thing going. We've got jobs in the United States, and these tariffs are threatening jobs in the United States. Not even through the same mechanisms. You've got you're going to make foreign competition, or you're going to take us away from the competitive frontier. You're going to shut down products that simply you're going to drive production outside of the United States, and all sorts of other unintended consequences from tariffs. So those are some amazing stories to tell. But why are your clients sticking their neck out on this issue?
Well, because they're impacted significantly, and some of them even existentially. Our client MicroKits is just one guy. If he can't be competitive, then he might not operate anymore. and he'll go do something else, and that will be a loss for the American economy, for kids and other people that are interested in these electronic kits. They're a great learning tool. The website's extremely fun. He's got some great videos of the products, and he has plans to make new products. But he can't do that because of these tariffs. The other thing that's, I think, important to point out is that it's not just the increased expense. Because these tariffs are imposed by the president, who asserts he has the power to impose tariffs on any country at any rate, at any time, for any reason that he wants, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And the uncertainty is really bad for business. They've got to make decisions that now about what's going to happen in 6 months from now. Our client David from MicroKits is already thinking about the Christmas season. But if he doesn't know what the tariff is going to be, then he can't make good decisions about when to import the products that he needs, to the components that he needs. And if he makes a wrong decision, that could be a really big problem for his business. VOS Selections also, as a wine seller, they've got to set their prices, at least in New York State, about 60 days or so in advance. If they don't know what they're going to be paying for the imports on their wine, they could set a price that they'll be obligated to sell at that could actually result in them losing money. So the uncertainty is a very big problem for our clients, but also businesses across the country, across the economy. And I think the longer that these go on, the more the effects will be, because in the short term you can stop the import and hope that there's a pause or something like that. But at some point you're going to run out of product, and then you're going to have to make a decision.
Well, let's talk about timing. What's the calendar for your case?
Well, as I said, we had oral argument on Tuesday. That's May 13th.
Yeah.
For anybody listening later. We expected a decision relatively soon. The Court of International Trade has moved pretty quickly on this case, at least for lawyers. Quickly is relative to other people, I think, yes. And maybe our clients would like them to move faster. But lawyers,
we're only a month and a half away from Liberation Day, so that's really
right. Good. So I would expect a decision, within a week or so. That would be pretty reasonable, and that decision could be a permanent injunction. We've asked for that, or it could just be a preliminary injunction while the case continues. Either way, if we're successful, we hope that the Liberation Day tariffs will be enjoined, which means that they will be stopped, they won't be imposed, and our clients can import without having to worry about these huge amounts of tariffs that they would have to pay.
Wow, that's remarkably quick for a court case. I assume, regardless of what happens, there's it's likely to go through an appeals process. How is that?
Yes, yeah. It almost certainly will be up on appeal. The appellate court for the Court of International Trade is called the Federal Court of Appeals, and that's in Washington, D.C. That operates just like any other appellate court, and so they would obviously hear the case. I think either we would ask the court to hear that on an emergency or an expedited basis if the tariffs aren't enjoined, or they could be enjoined temporarily while we hear the case in the appellate court, in which case it might take a little bit longer, depending on how what the court wants to do. And then, of course, the next step after that would be the U.S. Supreme Court. That court gets to decide whether or not it would want to hear this case. But it does seem like the kind of case that the Supreme Court would be interested in, because it's such an important issue. It affects the entire country. And so you would think that, and also it's such an extreme assertion of executive authority that you would think that the Supreme Court might want to weigh in on it.
So I want to talk about the Overton window on this issue because unilateral executive authority to set tariffs, um, you know, is not is within the Overton window because it's currently policy. And you're saying that no, the Constitution says you don't actually get to do that. How did this situation happen?
Well, I would say that this is outside the Overton window for a few reasons. Although Congress obviously has the constitutional power to issue tariffs, it has delegated that power in other statutes. But the statute that the president is asserting in this case, which is called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, is what they call it. Well, that's never been claimed by any president to be a statute that authorizes the president to impose tariffs. President Trump's the only president that's ever done that. That statute was passed in 1977, so it's getting close to 50 years that only one president has ever asserted the authority. That statute generally is about the president's emergency powers to regulate certain products or goods from certain countries because of some emergency. In fact, the statute says there has to be an emergency declared, and it has to be an unusual and extraordinary threat. So these are things like the Iran hostage crisis and what the president wants to do in response to the Iran's with respect to Iran's economic goods that they're exporting to the United States, things like that. Those are, or they could be specific to goods, and these aren't tariffs. These are, these certain products can't come into the United States for whatever reason, or if we're concerned about there could be extra regulations or extra review or things like that. Not a tariff. And there are other statutes that do give the president the authority to impose tariffs specifically, explicitly. And those, unlike IEPA, those statutes have some sort of process that the president has to go to, which means he can't immediately impose tariffs across the board. But they do allow the president to impose tariffs for some of the reasons that he's asserting, like national security. There's a specific statute that gives the president authority to issue tariffs about national security, about trade imbalances, or about unfair trade practices. There are statutes that give the president authority to impose tariffs because of those specific issues. So, to the extent that the president is concerned about those issues, he has statutes under which he can impose tariffs. He's just got to go through this process, and he doesn't want to do that. Instead, he wants to assert IEPA that gives him the power to impose tariffs on any country at any rate at any time for any reason immediately. And you can see since Liberation Day, he's changed the tariffs and attempted to work out deals with certain countries already. So he's changed it for any reason that he's wanted, and that is a problem. As I said, the uncertainty for the businesses is a huge issue.
So then it seems like even if you're successful, the president gets broad authority to enact tariffs. It's just that the limitation has to go through this process.
Yes, and it might not be that he can impose the tariffs that he wants to across the board like he's doing under these statutes. Also, Congress would have a role in there would be reports that have to be made to Congress, things like that, instead of just the president unilaterally acting.
Don't we already have trade agreements with a lot of these countries that were being or that we're levying tariffs on. Like,
Yeah, but that's of course another reason why the president shouldn't have unilateral authority. Trade agreements can be negotiated by the president, but ultimately treaties have to be approved by Congress.
mm.
And the same thing with trade agreements. So by unilaterally acting, and in fact, in some cases, going against these trade agreements, the president is again usurping authority that's constitutionally given to Congress.
Like, shouldn't the executive care about? Sorry, I'm trying to think about this. Is that one of the constitutional principles that helps make the country work? Is that it can't just be courts who care about what the Constitution means or what statutes mean. It seems like bending emergency authority to say I get to do whatever I want with tariff policy is pretty extreme. How is that just my opinion, or how would I know if that is extreme?
No, it is extreme. I agree. I think I've used the baseball analogy. We're not talking about a pitch that's at the knees or slightly below the knees, and we don't need to debate whether the strike zone is at the knees or slightly below to decide whether it's a strike or a ball. This is a wild pitch on the wrong side of the batter that's hit the backstop. It's clearly outside of the norm. It's clearly not an emergency. It's not unusual or extraordinary threat. It is something that is wildly outside of the norm. And the important thing, I think, important thing for people that might agree with what the president's doing, because there are people that agree with his policy on this, is even if you agree with the policy, you should be concerned about the process. You should be concerned about the way that the president has imposed these tariffs, because it is outside of the norm. And when it comes to these assertions of power, if a president can get away with a certain assertion of power, then the next president, who you might not have voted for and might impose a policy that you don't like using the same principles. And so we should be concerned about that, regardless of what we think about the policy that is at issue in this case.
What ought to be tariff policy?
Well, I'm not an economist. I'm just a lawyer, but I think that tariffs should be low to non-existent. There are attacks on our businesses, as is evident by my clients. They have to pay the tariff. They have to pay it as the product, or as the goods being implemented, not after they sell the product. So it's an upfront cost. For small businesses, that's obviously a huge problem, because it can create cash flow issues. So especially if you don't know what the tariff is going to be on any given day. And so, I think they should be low. Now, what do we do about unfair trade practices? I don't know, but not 10% across the board tariffs, and not by a unilateral president without any kind of input from Congress, who has the constitutional authority to impose tariffs.
How do we get there?
Well, one way is that the courts need to enforce it. The courts are not are a important branch of government, and that it is important that they act in this case. I will note that the president argued, at least the president's lawyers argued in court before the Court of International Trade, that the court has no role in deciding whether this is an emergency or whether this is an unusual or extraordinary threat. They say the court can't act at all, and effectively what their argument means is that the court is powerless to do anything when the president says that there's a national emergency and this is an unusual and extraordinary threat. He can tariff whatever rate on any country however he wants, and the courts can't do anything. I think that's a very extreme view, and I think the judges in the Court of International Trade were very concerned about that view.
Well, on the broader question of I guess of unilateral executive authority, like we seem to be in this gray area right now of if we declare and we saw this with COVID as well, when governors declared there's an emergency, so I got to do whatever I want and say things. And there was some pushback in the courts about that. Um, it seems like arbitrary, like if we're going to have extraordinary powers in an emergency, there should be something that clearly determines what is an emergency and does not. Is that something that's going to come out of this case?
Yeah, well, we have 6 reasons why we think that these tariffs are unlawful, and I discussed a little bit of them already. I think I mentioned IEPA doesn't actually say that the president has the tariff power. That's one reason to just straight out reject this argument, because it's not clear from the text. I also mentioned that it has to be an emergency, it has to be unusual and extraordinary. So the courts could decide this is outside of what an emergency is. The courts could decide this is not unusual or extraordinary. Then another argument is called the major questions doctrine. This is a doctrine the Supreme Court has used recently a few times, particularly against the Biden administration, when he attempted to use the student loan forgiveness program under the HEROES Act, in which case he said that there was a national security threat or something that justified giving these loan forgiveness. And the court applied the major questions doctrine. The major questions doctrine says when Congress delegates a constitutional authority that it has to the president or to an administrative agency, it's gotta be clear if it's a power that is of vast economic and political significance. And obviously, this power to tariff is of vast economic significance and political significance. And so Congress has to clearly speak when giving the president that power. Congress has not clearly spoken that the president has the power to unilaterally impose tariffs under IEPA. And so that's another avenue that the court could act. Another doctrine, another sort of obscure legal doctrine, if you will, is called the non-delegation doctrine. That doctrine goes back to the New Deal, and there the courts say, well, Congress just can't delegate all of its authority to the president. It's got to be at least some. There's got to be at least some limitation. Another way of thinking about it is essentially separation of powers. Congress just can't say, you know what, President, you do all of our work. Although Congress does seem to be more interested in doing that of late, not just in this administration, but in previous ones. But there needs to be some limit. We have 3 branches of government for a reason. One of those branches just can't decide that it's not going to operate and give us a unilateral executive that can then legislate. That's one of the reasons that we fought the Revolutionary War, and one of the reasons that our Constitution is set up the way that it is so that we can't have we don't have a king that imposes policy. And then the last reason of the 6 is constitutional avoidance. The way that the president has interpreted IEPA, we think would cause a constitutional problem. Obviously, either because it violates the non-delegation doctrine or because of the major questions doctrine. And so the court shouldn't accept that interpretation, because it should try to avoid the kind of interpretations of statutes that might lead to it being unconstitutional. So that's another avenue that the court could take in ruling in our favor.
So if you win your case, it's obviously a big victory for your clients, but it would be a victory for the separation of powers. It'd be the victory for constraints on executive authority. What else?
Well, I think it would be a victory for economic policy. I don't think that a huge. I don't think the president should have a huge power like this. I do think that the policy itself is bad. Again, you don't have to agree with me on that because the case is ultimately about separation of powers. But the result on our clients and also many others across the country is significant and bad, and the effects will
unintended.
Yes, and the effects I think will be as long if these tariffs go on longer, the effects will be felt by consumers soon because right now, for the last month or so, a lot of businesses could just hold off on maybe making imports, or they had imported before the tariffs kicked in, and so they got the products that they needed and they could sell at a normal price. But at some point, everything's going to have to be subject to these tariffs. That's when the prices are going to start to go up. Consumers will notice that. I think I read this morning that Walmart is probably going to increase its prices because of the tariffs. If that happens, I think you will see a lot of people recognize that this policy is not good policy.
Jeffrey, good luck on your case, and I hope you're right that that unilateral executive authority to establish emergency declarations do not give the president unilateral authority to establish tariffs, and that is outside of the Overton window.
Thanks, James.